At my daughter's wedding party, she said, "Cheers to my stepdad. He always makes life easier and never makes me doubt his love for me. Unlike the other man who calls himself my dad." Everyone laughed and mocked me. I felt lost and humiliated. I quietly stood up and left. 3 days later, she called me. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by subscribing to this channel. Click on the like button and tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. I used to think that love alone could carry a family. That if you gave enough of yourself, your time, your money, your sleep, your sanity, it would be enough to build something unshakable. I thought that about fatherhood especially. I wasn't perfect. God knows I made mistakes. But when my daughter was born, I made a vow in the hospital hallway with my hand pressed to the glass. She was red and screaming in that little incubator, and I promised that I would never let her feel alone in the world. Not once. Not on my watch. That promise sat in my chest like a stone, unchanging, heavy, and always there. Even after her mother walked out on our marriage and left me to raise her alone for years. There were nights I didn't sleep because she had a fever that wouldn't break, and I sat beside her bed with a wet cloth on her forehead, whispering lullabies from memory, just to make the hours pass. I learned how to braid her hair from YouTube tutorials and got laughed at the first few times until I got it right. I worked overtime shifts I wasn't physically up for, so she could have piano lessons, then smiled through the recitals even when she only played 3 notes right. I became the room parent at her elementary school, the only dad on a committee of moms who side-eyed me until they saw how hard I tried. I was there for every scraped knee, every science fair, every late-night meltdown about grades, or a fight with a friend. I was the parent who showed up, not out of obligation, but because she was mine, and I believed love required showing up. Things started to shift when she was around 13, maybe 14. Her mother came back into her life, this time with a new husband, wealthy, younger, polished in a way I never was. The kind of man who wore tailored shirts and knew how to say all the right things at dinner parties. She didn't call me daddy as much after that. It was dad. Then just my father when she introduced me to people. I noticed, but I didn't make it a thing. I told myself kids grow up. They test boundaries. That didn't mean she loved me any less. She still called when she was upset. Still needed rides home from college on weekends when she didn't feel like taking the train. But there was a wedge forming, quiet and slow like water seeping into a crack and freezing over time. One day, I saw a Facebook post she'd tagged her stepfather in. My hero, my rock, the man who taught me what love looks like. I stared at that caption for what felt like hours. There was no mention of me, no sign I'd ever existed in her emotional world. I didn't say anything, didn't like or comment on the post. Just closed the laptop and sat in the quiet. That was the first time I felt the beginning of something dying. Not love, but the illusion that it was still mutual. Still, when she got engaged, I stepped up like always. Wrote a check for most of the wedding expenses before she even asked. Offered to pay for the venue, the photographer, even her dress. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be a chance for us to reconnect. A wedding is about family, after all. I figured she'd want me there. I convinced myself she'd want to honor what we'd been through together. I clung to that idea like a lifeline, despite the signs that kept telling me otherwise. Like how I found out about the engagement on Instagram, or how she kept pushing back when I asked about giving a father of the bride speech. Let's just keep things simple, she said. No big speeches, no pressure. But I still clung to the fantasy. I told myself not everything has to be said out loud to be felt. That she would look at me on her wedding day and know that no matter how much distance had grown between us, I had been her constant, her anchor, her true father in every way that mattered. I tried not to let it bother me that her stepfather was helping her write her vows, or that he seemed to have a hand in every part of the planning while I was kept in the dark. I bit my tongue more times than I can count, thinking it was the loving thing to do, thinking that giving her space would bring her closer. But there's a difference between being patient and being invisible. I sat alone in my house the night before the wedding, tie hanging over the back of a kitchen chair, her baby photos still magnetized to the fridge. I stared at a picture of us at the zoo when she was 5, me holding her on my shoulders, her arms flung out wide like she could fly. I remember that day so vividly. She'd been scared of the monkeys at first, but I made a game out of it, telling her we had to walk past them like secret agents. She laughed so hard she snorted, and I thought, in that moment, I am the luckiest man alive. That memory, that photo, felt like a lie now. Like I had been playing a part in someone else's story and didn't realize I was only a temporary character. So I told myself, just get through the day, smile, be proud. This isn't about you. But deep down, I was afraid. Not of the wedding, not of the stepfather, but of finally admitting that I had poured myself into a daughter who no longer saw me as essential. That maybe the version of her who clung to my hand when crossing the street had vanished entirely, replaced by someone who now measured love in status updates and dinner parties. I didn't want to believe that all those years had added up to nothing, but a part of me did. And that part sat heavy in my chest like that same stone I carried all those years ago. Only now, it didn't feel like love. It felt like grief. The invitation came late. Not just in the mail, but in the timeline of everything. Her wedding was barely 2 months away when I finally received a cream-colored envelope addressed to Mr. William Hayes, with no return name, just a digital printing company's watermark on the back. I ran my thumb under the flap and unfolded it carefully, like it might contain something fragile. It was elegant, sure, thick cardstock, silver trim, her name in cursive above his in block letters. No mention of me walking her down the aisle. No space carved out for a speech, a toast, or even a role. Just an invitation to attend. A guest among strangers. I stared at it for 10 minutes, sitting alone at my kitchen table, before finally setting it down next to a pile of unpaid bills and feeling something in me snap, quietly, like a thread giving way under too much weight. I called her the next day, pretending to be calm. I asked about the venue, whether she needed help coordinating anything last minute, what I should wear. She sounded distracted, like I was interrupting something more important. "Oh, just wear something nice," she said. "We've got it all covered." David's really taken the lead on the planning. David, her stepfather. She said his name with such ease, such casual affection, like it was obvious he'd be the one running the show. I asked, point blank, if she wanted me to walk her down the aisle. There was a pause, long enough to sting. "Actually," she said, "David's doing that." I figured it made the most sense since he's been, really present the past few years. The way she said it, really present, hit harder than any curse word ever could. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded into the phone, even though she couldn't see me, and said, "Okay, got it." And we ended the call like two acquaintances confirming a dinner reservation. Not like a father and daughter days away from what should have been one of the most meaningful moments of their lives. That night, I poured myself a drink, something I hadn't done in years, and sat in the living room flipping through old VHS tapes I'd transferred to DVDs. Her 3rd birthday, her high school graduation, her first bike ride, with me running behind her, cheering. All those moments mine. All those years mine. But now, reduced to an afterthought in a silver-trimmed envelope. I tried to convince myself not to take it personally. I really did. I told myself weddings are chaotic. That maybe she was overwhelmed. That maybe she assumed I'd understand. But the truth kept clawing its way back to the surface. She didn't want me there for her big moment. Not as a father. Not as anything more than a placeholder. The man who signed checks. The man who kept showing up, even when it stopped matching. I should have bowed out then. Sent a polite RSVP and skipped the ceremony altogether. But some stupid part of me, some old, wounded part, still wanted to see her happy. Still thought maybe I'd get a hug at the end, a whispered thank you, some shred of acknowledgement that I'd mattered. That I hadn't wasted the last 25 years loving someone who no longer saw me as family. I spent the week leading up to the wedding in a haze. I bought a new suit, got my shoes shined, even wrote a short speech, just in case the opportunity arose. It was a stupid, hopeful thing to do. I wrote about her first steps, her love of cherry popsicles, the time she begged me to let her stay up late and watch the stars. I wrote about how proud I was, how no father could ever love his daughter more. I folded it neatly into my pocket the morning of the wedding, heart pounding like I was heading to battle. And in a way I was. Not against anyone else, but against the part of me that still hoped. The venue was beautiful. It always is, isn't it? Candlelight flickering from gold sconces, a string quartet playing some slow, breathy piece I didn't recognize. The guests milled about in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos, sipping champagne and snapping selfies. I stood alone near the back, watching people I didn't know fawn over a woman I barely recognized anymore. And when she walked down the aisle, she was glowing. Truly. Her dress flowed like something out of a magazine, her hair pulled back in soft curls. And beside her, smiling and proud, was David, her stepfather, her real dad. The man she wanted the world to see in that role. I clapped, of course, like everyone else. I smiled for the photos. I nodded during the vows. I kept my silence because that's what fathers do, right? We sacrifice. We disappear gracefully when we're no longer wanted. But inside, I was unraveling. Every laugh, every cheer, every "ah" from the crowd felt like a knife to the chest. Not because I didn't want her to be happy, but because I wasn't part of that happiness. I wasn't even allowed near it. At the reception, they seated me at the far end of the hall, next to her mother's cousin and some co-worker of David's. No one spoke to me much, and I didn't force conversation. I watched her dance with David for the father-daughter dance, and something in my chest just gave out. I stood quietly, buttoned my jacket, and walked outside for air. No one noticed. No one followed. And in that moment, I realized something brutal and freeing all at once. I had already been erased from her life. The toast was still to come, but my heart was already halfway out the door. I stood at the edge of the venue lawn, watching the night unravel like ribbon in the breeze. The reception lights glowed soft gold, strung above rows of white tables filled with guests who'd already forgotten I was part of this day. I had my hand wrapped around a glass of something I didn't even taste, something expensive and unnecessary. I could hear the clinking of forks against crystal as the dinner service wrapped up and the DJ called for attention. "It's time for toasts," he said, chipper and oblivious. Everyone turned toward the dance floor, all eyes forward. I hesitated before stepping back in. I should have walked away then. I should have followed my instincts and disappeared into the night. But I didn't. I went back in like a fool. I returned to my lonely table and sat quietly, the sweat from my glass pooling on the white linen, the folded speech in my pocket feeling heavier than lead. There was a little knot in my stomach, one that had been growing since she chose David to walk her down the aisle. I told myself not to expect anything. No acknowledgement, no moment, no thanks. I coached myself to be calm, to be composed, to endure the final act of this little play without embarrassing her or myself. But no amount of inner rehearsal could have prepared me for what happened next. Her new husband stood first, gave a charming, slightly rehearsed speech full of humor and safe sentiment. Then her maid of honor said something sweet, something about sisterhood and growing up together. The crowd laughed, clapped, wiped away a few tears. And then she stood. My daughter. She took the mic with ease, confident, radiant, glowing with the arrogance of someone who believed she stood entirely on the right side of history. "I want to thank the most important man in my life," she began, and for one absurd moment, my heart lifted. I felt it twitch in my chest like a dying flame given air. I thought, God help me, I thought she meant me. To the man who taught me what real love looks like, who stood by me in every moment without ever making me question if I was worthy. The man who never failed to make life easier, who showed me that family is chosen, not forced. She turned toward David then, smiling like he'd just cured cancer. "Cheers to my stepdad, the man who earned the title of dad every single day." The room erupted in laughter, clinking glasses, warm applause. She didn't stop there. "Unlike the other man who calls himself my dad," she said, light in tone but sharp in edge. "We all know love isn't about blood. It's about action. And he's the one who showed me that." Another wave of laughter rolled across the room, a little louder now, meaner. My name wasn't spoken, but the implication rang clear as a bell. I felt every eye flick toward me, some with awkward sympathy, others with poorly hidden amusement. One guest even turned all the way around to glance at me, smirking like I was part of some inside joke. My ears burned, my face felt hot, and yet my whole body went cold. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I sat there with that speech still burning a hole in my jacket pocket, and realized something irrevocable. I had become the punchline of my daughter's life. After 2 decades of being her everything, I was now the other man. The man who loved too quietly, who sacrificed too much, who showed up too often and asked for nothing. And for that, I had been deemed forgettable, disposable, laughable. I stood slowly. No one noticed at first, and then a few did. Heads turned again, quieter this time. A few guests shifted awkwardly, maybe sensing the crack in the facade. I walked out without a word, the applause from her toast still echoing behind me like some cruel soundtrack. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for her to notice I was gone. I stepped out into the cool night, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and walked to my car with a calm that felt almost surreal. Not anger, not even heartbreak, just a hollow clarity that something was over. Something sacred had been broken. I drove home in silence. No music, no calls, just the hum of the road and the sharp sting of realization. I had been grieving our relationship for years, quietly, in the spaces between phone calls and missed birthdays. But now the burial was official. She had done it publicly, with laughter and wine and applause. She had rewritten our story and cast me as a villain in a script I'd written with my own blood. And the worst part? She believed it. She truly believed her own version. Back home, I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I sat in the dark of my living room. Lights off, phone face down on the coffee table. That speech was still in my pocket, folded and perfect. I unfolded it once, read it over. The lines that once felt so true now read like something out of someone else's life. I shredded it quietly, slowly, feeding each piece into the trash like I was performing a ritual. This wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about dignity, about reclaiming what little self-respect I still had left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face during the toast, that proud smirk, that laugh that didn't tremble once with guilt. I kept hearing her say the other man, over and over, like a record skipping. I had loved her beyond reason, beyond fairness. I gave her everything, my home, my health, my future. And she'd thrown it back at me, not in anger, but in mockery. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was humiliation. And somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, I made my decision. No more hoping. No more waiting. No more giving. I would sever the financial ties. I would take back what I could. She had chosen her side. And I, finally, would choose mine. The next morning, the sun rose like it always did, but the world didn't feel the same. My house, once filled with pictures of her smile and the echoes of her childhood, now felt like a crime scene. Quiet, hollow, and heavy with the weight of something unforgivable. I didn't check my phone. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't open the curtains. I sat in the kitchen with black coffee and silence, my body numb from the night before, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. It was a strange clarity, like finally waking up after years of pretending to sleep. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was observing the wreckage. I pulled out old bank statements first, not because I needed to see the numbers, but because I wanted to feel them. Every tuition payment, every rent deposit, every monthly transfer labeled, just in case you need it, stared back at me like quiet confessions. I had been financing a version of love that didn't exist anymore, maybe hadn't existed in years. I'd convinced myself that providing for her meant she loved me, that the silent loyalty I was buying would one day return to me in moments of respect, acknowledgement, maybe even pride. But what I got instead was a toast that mocked my role in her life, a room full of people who laughed at my expense, and a daughter who stood before them and claimed a man she met at 16 had been more of a father than I ever was. The house I gave her was under my name. A small 2-bedroom in a good neighborhood, fully furnished, fully funded, fully hers, on paper. I drove over there later that day, unannounced. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and I knew she was still on her honeymoon, probably sipping mimosas and checking Instagram likes. I stood in the driveway for a while before going in. I had a key, of course. She never bothered to ask for a transfer of ownership or to change the locks. I walked through that house and looked at every single item I had paid for. The marble countertops, the plush white couch, the framed "Home is where the heart is" sign on the wall. It felt absurd, like I had furnished a life I wasn't invited to. I took nothing. I just stood there, one hand against the wall, letting it all sink in. Then I left, drove straight to my attorney's office, and began the paperwork. Revoked access to the joint bank card. Terminated the automatic monthly deposit. Filed to reclaim ownership of the house. I didn't do it in rage. I did it because it was overdue. I did it because love does not require you to be a fool. My attorney asked if I was sure. I said yes without hesitation. She chose her side. I said, I'm finally choosing mine. That night, the silence returned, but this time it didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. No buzzing phone, no hollow apologies, no half-hearted justifications. Just me, my boundaries, and the first breath I'd taken in years that didn't feel like it had to be filtered through guilt. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't pace or spiral either. I just laid in bed, watching the ceiling fan spin, thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to buy love that should have been free. It wasn't until the third day that she finally called. I saw her name flash on the screen and just stared at it for a while. My heart didn't leap. My stomach didn't flip. I felt nothing. Eventually, I picked up. Hey, she said, her voice suddenly smaller, the edge from her wedding speech gone. I didn't know you left early. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch long enough that she started to fill it. I realized later what I said came off wrong, she continued. It was just a joke, you know? People were laughing. I got caught up in the moment. I didn't mean it like that. I exhaled slowly, still not speaking. She rushed in to fill the gap again. Look, I love you, okay? I do. I'm sorry if I hurt you. David has done a lot, and I wanted to make sure he felt seen too. But that doesn't mean I don't appreciate you. I do. Can we just talk about it? There it was, her plea. Her voice cracking just enough to suggest vulnerability, but not enough to carry remorse. I could hear her waiting for me to rescue her, to say it was okay, to fold like I always did. But I didn't. I've already handled what needed handling, I said, my voice even. The cards are shut off. The house is being transferred back to me, and you've been removed from my will. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. Then, her voice rising, panicked. Wait, what? You're kidding, right? I wasn't. I told her it wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary. You made it clear who your father is, I said. Now you get to live with that choice. She went quiet for a long time. Then, softly, you don't mean that. But I did. I meant every word. I hung up before she could say more. I didn't want her begging or crying or manipulating me with memories. I had given too much for too long. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. About finally drawing a line in the sand and saying, I matter, too. I turned off my phone after that. Sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the wind move through the trees like nothing had happened. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on her. I wasn't wondering what more I could do. I had done enough. Too much, even. And now I was done. I thought the hard part would be making the decision. That once I cut the ties, financial, emotional, symbolic, it would all start to fade like a bad dream the morning after. But severing someone from your life, especially your child, doesn't end in silence. It echoes. It reverberates through every corner of your world like a low, constant hum. And it wasn't long before that hum turned into a full-blown roar. On the fourth day after the wedding, my ex-wife called. First once, then again, and again, until I finally picked up out of sheer exhaustion, not curiosity. What the hell did you do? She barked, voice sharp like broken glass. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I sat down on the edge of my bed, one hand pressed to my temple. No, I said quietly. I'm responding to 25 years of erasure. She scoffed like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to make it about me. She was joking, she snapped. People laugh at weddings. It was lighthearted. You're being sensitive, as usual. That phrase, as usual, sparked something in me. It brought back all the years she called me dramatic whenever I tried to express that I was overwhelmed raising our daughter alone while she floated in and out of the picture, always blaming work or bad timing. I was there when you weren't, I said. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. I was there when she cried over scraped knees, when she couldn't sleep during thunderstorms, when she failed her first math test. I was there when you were chasing jobs and new husbands. And now I'm the punchline. She started to respond, but I cut her off. If you raised her to believe that stepping on the man who raised her is funny, Then you succeeded. Congratulations. I ended the call before she could spit more venom. I didn't need her permission to be angry. Not anymore. What followed next was a parade of messages, from her cousins, from old family friends, even from her stepfather himself. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted to explain, excuse, or guilt me back into compliance. The consensus was that I had overreacted, that I should have taken the joke on the chin and kept smiling. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't about a single moment. It was about a lifetime of showing up only to be edited out of the narrative. And now, when I finally said enough, I was suddenly the villain. David, her beloved stepfather, even had the nerve to text me directly. It was short, smug, and absolutely drenched in false diplomacy. Sorry if the toast rubbed you wrong. I've always respected your role in her life. Let's not let a misunderstanding ruin years of peace. I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes before deleting it without responding. Respect? If he respected me, he wouldn't have stood beside her while she humiliated me in front of 100 people. He would have stepped in, stopped her, or at the very least looked uncomfortable. But no. He smiled, soaked up the praise, and never looked back. 2 days later, my daughter showed up unannounced. I heard her car in the driveway, that old engine still misfiring like I'd told her it would, and my stomach turned. She rang the doorbell twice before knocking, loud and sharp. I opened the door and didn't invite her in. She stood there, eyes red, makeup smudged, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big for her tiny frame. She looked small again, vulnerable, like the girl I used to comfort after nightmares. For a moment, I almost broke. Almost. But then I remembered that girl no longer saw me as her safe place. I was now the joke. "Dad, please," she said, voice cracking. "We need to talk." I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. There's nothing left to say. She grabbed my arm. "You're really doing this? You're really cutting me off because of one joke?" I shook her hand off gently but firmly. "It wasn't just a joke. It was a public declaration that I no longer mattered to you. And you said it with your whole chest, with a glass raised, while people laughed. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She started crying then, real, hard tears. I didn't mean it like that. I was trying to make David feel appreciated. I didn't think. I cut her off. "That's exactly it. You didn't think. You didn't think about me, about what I gave up, about what it cost me to raise you alone. You didn't think about the years I spent making sure you never felt abandoned. And in one sentence, you abandoned me." She sobbed, shaking her head. "I was wrong, okay? I'm sorry. I'll fix it. I'll tell people I was just being stupid." But the damage was already done. I looked her in the eye and said, "I don't need a public apology. I needed you to remember who the hell I am. And you didn't. You forgot." She begged me to reconsider. Promised she would make it up to me. Said she'd give the house back voluntarily, that she didn't care about the money, that she just wanted things to be okay. But I told her that forgiveness doesn't always come with a reset button. Sometimes it just means letting go, for good. I told her I hoped she had a good life, that I truly did wish her well. But I wouldn't be in it. Not anymore. She drove off in tears, and this time, I didn't watch her taillights disappear. I went back inside, sat on the couch, and stared out the window. I thought I'd feel guilt. I thought the silence would crush me. But it didn't. It was like finally dropping a bag of bricks I didn't realize I was still carrying. For so long, I thought my job was to protect her, love her, provide for her, no matter what. But I forgot that I mattered too. That my dignity wasn't a resource to be bled dry for someone else's comfort. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was clear. And in that clarity, I found something I hadn't felt in years: relief. Not because I had lost a daughter, but because I had finally stopped losing myself. There was a strange peace that settled in after the storm passed. Not joy, not triumph, just a stillness I hadn't felt in decades. Like a room that had finally been cleaned out after years of clutter, dust, and quiet resentment. In the days that followed my daughter's visit, I didn't go back to the past. I didn't replay the wedding toast in my head. I didn't scroll through her old messages or reread her childhood birthday cards looking for signs that maybe, at one point, I had meant more. I stopped looking backward altogether. I let it go. Not because I no longer cared, but because holding on was killing me, slowly, like emotional rust. I began to reclaim small corners of my life. I started cooking again, not for anyone else, not for some shared dinner table that no longer existed, but for myself. I made meals I liked, even if they took too long or required too many dishes. I dug out my old record player and played albums I hadn't touched since my 20s, letting the music fill the house where silence had once been so loud. I signed up for a weekend photography class at the community center, something I always told myself I'd do later, back when I was always waiting on someone else's schedule, someone else's needs. For the first time in what felt like forever, I made choices without considering how they would ripple outward. I didn't ask, will she approve? I asked, do I want this? And most days, the answer came quickly, cleanly, without guilt. I saw the wedding photos online a week later. Her profile was still public, an oversight, I suppose. In the pictures, she looked radiant, arms draped around David, beaming in every shot. There was one photo of them holding hands during her toast, and I could almost hear the words again, the ones that gutted me. Unlike the other man who calls himself my dad, I didn't feel the sting this time. I just clicked away, closed the tab, and went outside to water the plants. That was the thing about truth. It didn't need to be relived endlessly to be valid. I had lived it once. That was enough. My sister, Elaine, called one afternoon not long after. She'd heard through the grapevine about the wedding, the toast, the aftermath. I hadn't told her much, just the barest facts. But she knew me well enough to fill in the blanks. I don't get it, she said. After everything you did for her, how could she stand up there and humiliate you like that? I didn't have an answer, and I told her so. Maybe I was too easy to take for granted, I said. Maybe I was just always there, and that made me invisible. Elaine was quiet for a moment before saying, you deserved better. And that, coming from someone who had seen me patch shoes, skip meals, and work double shifts just to make rent during those early years, meant something. A month passed, then two. There were no new messages, no calls. The silence stretched long and thin, and while a part of me had expected her to return, to try again, to storm back into my life demanding forgiveness like she always did before, she didn't. And that, in itself, was another kind of clarity. Her silence was louder than any apology. It told me everything I needed to know, that the man she toasted, the one who never made her question his love, was the man she'd chosen. And I was just the one who'd done the hard part. The early years, the unglamorous parenting that didn't make it into speeches. I wasn't bitter. I was tired, but it was a peaceful kind of tired. The kind that comes after a long journey when you finally get to sit down and rest without worrying who still needs something from you. I'd spent so much of my life pouring from a cup that never refilled. Now, I kept it close. I sipped slowly. I refilled it only for myself. I still loved her. Of course I did. That doesn't just vanish. But I no longer confused love with obligation. I no longer believed that being someone's father meant accepting emotional scraps and calling them a feast. She had taught me that, not with tenderness, but with cruelty. And in doing so, she set me free. One evening, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip behind the trees, casting long gold shadows across the yard. There was no noise, no movement, just the soft rustle of leaves and the hum of distant cars. And I thought about the years ahead, the life still waiting for me. It wouldn't be the life I imagined when I first held her in that hospital room, when I swore I'd always protect her. But it would be mine. Fully, finally mine. No more waiting for calls. No more scanning crowds for her face. No more giving pieces of myself to someone who saw them as disposable. Somewhere out there, she was building her own story now. Maybe one day she'd look back and realize what she'd done. Maybe not. That was her journey. Mine had changed course, not by choice, but by necessity. I had spent years surviving for someone else. Now, I would live for me. And that didn't make me cruel. That made me whole. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone only to be cast aside, I hope this story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by who claps for you or who forgets you. Sometimes, the hardest but most necessary thing is to choose yourself. Have you ever walked away from someone you once would have done anything for? Tell your story in the comments. We read every one. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more real, raw stories to people who need to hear them. See you soon in the next one.